So this is the first Infoz tutorial. It's the getting started guide. Before you start using the Infoz tutorial, it's important to get GameX set up properly. So the first thing to do is to get some emulators set up and running. This is an example of a setup. I've got 3 emulators set up, just an example. I've got SNES, Atari 2600 and Sony PlayStation. The important thing is that you have your ROM path populated. If you don't have your ROM path populated, then Infoz won't recognize it as an emulator. The other thing is Infoz uses assets derived from the paths populated here. So it'll grab any snaps, logos, etc. from the paths that you've specified here in these settings here, basically. So populate these before you run Infoz. You can always come back and populate them later, but it's always worthwhile just getting these done. And getting some images downloaded before you run Infoz. So that gives you some assets to work with before you run Infoz, basically. Don't populate this path here if you're going to be theming, because that can it can basically cause some squiffy behaviors. If you're doing custom themes and you want kind of background images, custom background images, if you have an image pattern here, it can cause some strange behaviors. So if you're doing custom themes, if you're using Infoz for custom themes, don't populate that path there. The other thing I'd recommend is that you download databases for each system that you're going to be using for emulators. You do that via the repository wizard, repository manager. You can you can look into how to do that. You basically filter by databases, and you found the database you want, and you download it, etc. Once you've downloaded it, select the database. Now, the reason you do that is because Infoz leverages the databases for each system for metadata, etc. So try and make sure you have the database set against each emulator. The other thing to do is, once you've run your emulator or set up your emulator, make sure you've run GameX once, and GameX will essentially populate its own games list for each emulator. Infoz then populates its games lists from GameX's games lists. So it's important that you've run GameX in order to set things up, basically. The other thing is to, if you plan on using Infoz for MAME games, to set up all your MAME settings, etc. And particularly for kind of controller images as well, make sure you populate all your MAME stuff beforehand. So that's mainly it in terms of the GameX setup. So once you've got a few things set up, you don't have to get everything set up before you run Infoz, but it's worth getting a couple of things set up, because that gives you some dummy data, as it were, some like images and assets to work with, to get you started. Each time you run Infoz, it will kind of update emulators and asset paths and things like that each time you run it. So let's have a look for setup plugins. One thing to explain is that if we launch it from here, it does launch the old plugin manager. For some reason, Infoz doesn't launch very well from the new plugin launchers. That's the setup wizard and also the repo manager as well. So if we launch it from here, it does launch the old manager. It just basically installs this when you install the Infoz plugins. So it will automatically launch it from here. So if you launch it from here, when it's the first run, it'll just do some setup. So it'll just take a bit of time to launch. There we go. So just to give you a bit of an overview about Infoz, I'll probably take that out. There's nothing in file. Now view these individual components you can move about and kind of reposition all the rest of it. Let's put that back where it was. Now there is something called the debug console. This can be helpful, not so much in the configuration mode, but when you're running Infoz in the GameX, when the GameX front end is showing, you can watch this to see what's happening behind the scenes. So it can be quite helpful for kind of debugging and seeing what's going on. So you can show that via the view. Show panes will show different types of panes. If you close any of these, if you close the element selector, then you can show it again. Usual kind of stuff, really. Now show displays. Now that shows you basically the display number. If you've got multiple displays, it will show you all the details of the different displays. Tools I won't go into here, but that just gives you various kind of tools and functions that can be helpful. Health just gives you, that's not quite finished yet, but it just gives you some helpful information about how to use it, etc. So the main thing, this kind of concepts about how you use this. Your object selector is, so everything's an object basically. So you have different screens. This setup I'm working on has 4 different displays basically. So each thing is an object. You have emulators. So as I say, I've set up 4 different emulators. So each thing's an object. You have screens, you have emulators. Now, so each emulator has properties. So for example, let's go down to GameX. So you remember we set up the paths. So for each emulator, you have these different kind of paths. So these are properties. So the property of each emulator has a property title, path box, path, etc. So that's the basic kind of premise behind these. These are kind of quick launch actions. So for emulators, you can delete all emulator cache layout images. That won't make much sense at the moment, but if I were to select controllers, I can add a new controller, and you just hover that to bring up the quick actions basically. So that's the object selector. What else? So you have so that's emulators. Now one thing I'd recommend you do off the bat is to go to tools, go to import, and do this. Import system images zip file. Now to keep the plugin download size low, I omitted all the kind of different system images files. So there's lots of kind of system photos, system box images, different kind of logo images that are quite large. That would have made it quite a large download. But there is a separate file available, which kind of gives you a lot more assets to kind of make your info displays a lot richer. So if you do this, the the systems.zip file should be it'll be somewhere on the GameX sites basically, hopefully with the plugin download on the plugin download page or something. It'll be findable, I'm sure. So systems.zip, you just find the file. If you look down here, this shows you all kind of long running operations. So I'll just give you an update in terms of how that's going. And there you go. And in terms of conflicts, don't worry too much about the logo thing. So wheel.png, they're already in there for systems. So the only reason it says there's a conflict is just you've overwritten them basically, but that's no issue. What else? So now, so you've got systems imported. So you've got the emulators imported. Now at the moment, there's no games. So what you have to instruct Infoz to do is to look at the GameX games lists and to import those into Infoz. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. The other thing is context menus as well. So for each object, you can right click, and if you select update games for emulator, it updates the games. So it basically imports the games into Infoz. And if you click now on games, you'll see it's imported all the different games. If you look down the properties, it's imported all the different kind of game properties from the GameX database. So do that for all the games. The other way you can do it is update games for all emulators, and it'll go through again down the bottom here. It'll show you any kind of batch operations or long-winded operations. Hopefully we should now see all games for all systems. Sometimes this is a bit, oh no, that's good. I think MAME you might have to do separately. Yeah. So that, yeah, so MAME do separately, I think. Yeah, there we go. So there are all your different MAME games. So that's game imports. Let's have a quick think what else I can introduce. So this is the main toolbar. So I won't do all of this in this video, but one of the main concepts to kind of get in Infoz is the idea of layouts. So the main idea of Infoz is that you're going to present different layouts on different screens on your setup. So if we were to do let's add a new layout. So these are all you this is your layout. And these are all your kind of layout manipulation tools, basically. So if I right click, these are all your layout elements. So element selector, these are elements. That's image, text, rectangle, rig controls, don't worry about those too much at the moment, and theme elements. So that's when you're doing theme editing, but these three are your main kind of components. If we click this, it'll add an image, or you can right click and add image. So we just put a few of those in, and all these controls here, your main kind of familiar stuff in image editors, all your main kind of image controls. So your main controls are, you can hold control key on your keyboard and use your mouse wheel to scroll in and out. You can hold control and hold on your left mouse button, and then you can pan your workspace around. You can use this to fit the canvas to your workspace. You can select all elements or deselect them by clicking outside of the workspace. You can show a grid, and you can define the size of the grid in options, just to show options settings, sorry. So where are we? Designer view. So there, you can set up your grid there as well. You can set up the grid color. You can't change the opacity here, but you can change it in the options view. What else? You've got snap to grid, you've got resize to grid, usual stuff, and then you've got all your kind of normal. If you press shift as well, that's your multi-select. That's your primary object, and these are your secondary objects. So if, let's say, align tops, that will align to primary object. Let's do make horizontal spacing equal. There we go. So usual stuff with that, really. Make same size. So yeah, that's about it with those. You can do the usual stuff about copy and paste as well. So if I, at the moment, this is a static image, so let's turn this into that. And then if I do a copy, usual stuff, and paste. Oh, don't quite know why it's done that. But anyway, usual stuff, copy, paste. What else? You've got image effects as well, so you can do a blur. So that's quite nice for backgrounds and things. And sometimes things like theme creator, that will only be relevant when you're doing a layout that's a theme for theme creators. So sometimes properties will only be relevant to certain types of layout. Anything else? I think that's probably about it. We'll cover all dynamic images, static images, or that type of thing later on. Your element selector is really about, let's change this to a different type of image so we can show that. Change that. So this is basically about Z order. That is what appears in front of what. So let's call that plate. Let's call that set. Let's call that medal. So you'll notice that medal's at the bottom, at the top rather, here. And the top is essentially the bottom of the Z order. So if I move that over jet set, then you now notice that appears over there. You just drag and drop, basically. I mean, you can send to bottom, just right click, send to back, and then that will go to the back. Yeah, so I think at the moment, I won't go into all these at the moment because they're very specific to layouts and things like that. So that's a basic overview of getting started with Infoz and the layouts. So the next tutorial will be about themes and the theme editor.